itself is an emotion. I experience it, I'm sure most people in this room experience it at times as well. So what are the signs that would indicate that it's actually progressing to a clinical anxiety disorder or a major depressive disorder? So if you notice that your kid is really sad and withdrawn, like Brother Fahim said, that's one of the signs also, or they're irritable consistently and it persists for 2 weeks or longer. And in addition to that, you notice that they're losing interest in things that they previously were very excited about. If you notice, if a kid was very interested in soccer and they just don't look happy anymore, if they were very involved in activities in the masjid, and if they were regular with their prayers, if they're not as interested anymore, those are all signs that they need to be evaluated and you should talk to their doctor. Other than that, if you notice changes in appetite, if you notice that they're sleeping a lot more than usual or having trouble sleeping, if they have trouble concentrating, if to you it looks like your kid is suddenly being very lazy, often laziness is actually a symptom of depression, even in adults, because you lose motivation when you're depressed. You lose motivation when you're anxious and you're dealing with a lot of overwhelming anxiety, right? And we can relate to this because we're all human, and even if we have never suffered from anxiety and depression, we all have gone through periods where we struggled to be able to function because our emotions were just so overwhelming. And we know that we become lazy at that time too. So try to just relate to the kid to understand what might be going on with them. Oftentimes, anxiety and depression can actually present with physical body symptoms like headaches, chest pain, stomach aches, and if you've gone to the doctor several times, they've done a workup, and they say, everything looks fine, oftentimes it is due to underlying anxiety and depression that's being presented as a body symptom. So that's something to keep in mind as well. It's also very important to mention that anxiety disorder and depression are not choices the teen makes. They're not like decisions that they're making, that they're choosing to be anxious or depressed. These are health conditions that can happen to anyone. They're never an indicator of weak faith or weak character at all. And in my practice, I've noticed this a lot, that often when I share the diagnosis with the parents, their initial reaction is guilt or being defensive, that what could I have done, or I did everything right, like why is my kid who has such a great life and they have no problem seemingly, why are they feeling sad? They just don't understand, and they start feeling guilty, because as parents we all want the best for our kids. We all work very hard to give them good lives, but just like any other health condition, depression and anxiety can happen to anybody. Even when things are going right, seemingly, this can happen sometimes. And when our kid gets asthma or migraines, we don't blame it on ourselves, right? We don't think that we did something wrong. We take the necessary steps. We make sure we're staying on top of their doctor appointments. We have their inhalers ready. We avoid their triggers. And in addition to all of that, we also make dua. If our kid, God forbid, ends up with a health condition, we turn to the community for prayers, in addition to getting professional help. So that is the approach that we should have for anxiety and depression also. Our faith is definitely a big source of strength, but professional help and compassionate parenting is equally important. One of the greatest blessings that we do have actually is that our faith and our community protects our mental health. There are certain factors that serve as protective factors when it comes to mental health, and faith, being connected to faith, and this isn't something I'm making up, this is backed by research, that being connected to faith actually gives you a sense of purpose, strength, resilience, and support. The problem is more that culturally often there is a stigma attached to mental health, when in Islam historically there has been a lot of emphasis on the connection of the mind and body, and Muslims were actually among the first ones to build a mental health ward in the hospitals dedicated specifically for mental health. So this concept is not new actually. So that's why it's important to have an approach where you are staying connected to faith, but at the same time, you're making sure that it's being approached from a clinical standpoint as well. our beautiful religion gives us a lot of tools like tawakkul, you know, sabr, having patience when we're going through hardships, and shukr. You know, everybody in psychology talks about gratitude, having gratitude journals. Shukr is such a big concept in our lovely, you know, beautiful religion that actually protects our mental health. And as parents, we can, you know, model these in front of them, and at the same time teaching them gently, you know, these, because these aren't just spiritual ideas, they're actually solid coping skills that can become anchors that protect our kids' well-being and gives them some tools on how to manage stressors. So what are some things that we can do to protect our kids' mental health? I'm sure that's a question everyone has in mind, like once we've identified, what can we do? So the first step is obviously for any health condition, even mental health, is prevention. You know, a brother talked about substance abuse. Actually, it can sometimes be a complication of untreated depression, untreated anxiety, because of which teens and youth often resort to drugs as an unhealthy coping mechanism. So screening is very important. It's recommended that every year the child should be screened for anxiety at the age of 8 and above, and for depression they should be screened at 12 and above. I actually start the screening early. I start screening for depression at 10, even though typically it's recommended at 12. So when you take your kids to their yearly checkups, practically speaking, I'm not proud of this fact, but sometimes pediatric offices are very busy and they miss it, and they just casually ask, do you want to be screened for depression? And the parent's like, no, my kid's fine. And the kid's like, I'm fine. And the kid never gets screened. So if you look at the numbers, the clinics are not doing a good job in screening as much as they should. So make sure you advocate for your child and you say that, you know, let's get them screened. Okay, let's get our kids screened today, and are you going to do that? And it's a simple questionnaire that they'll give you, takes less than 5 minutes. If it's negative, it's very reassuring for you as well. So there's no loss there. If God forbid it's positive, they'll get the help that they need, right? The other thing is, of course, I think Brother Fahim talked about listening. That's actually very, very important. Listening to your teen in a non-judgmental manner. And I like what he said about listening more than you're talking. You know, we wanna lecture them often. Teens don't listen a lot of times. They also don't talk, and a lot of time parents say that my child doesn't talk to me. It is sometimes because they feel judged or they feel scared. And one thing I've noticed, which I think is a great thing, mashallah, is that most Muslim kids are very focused on their studies and they're very goal-oriented, because our religion protects us from a lot of distractions and a lot of harmful things. So most Muslim kids are actually doing great. They're very ambitious. They have a lot of goals. Their parents are very involved in their lives, making sure their kids are on top of their grades, and they have, you know, goals to get in colleges, and they end up being very successful. We don't intend to do that as parents, but often the way the kid perceives is that their acceptance is conditional upon them achieving things in life, and if they're struggling, they feel shame or they feel scared to open up that, you know, I'm struggling with math, or it's getting hard for me to manage soccer, school, and, you know, piano lessons, and you know, also keeping up with all the other classes that I'm taking. And they may not open up to you, and it's not a failure on your part as a parent. It's so important to not feel guilty and to keep the focus on how you can help your child. But the child might perceive it that way. So we can remind them that we are so proud of everything they're doing, but our support for them is not conditional on those achievements, because the reality is that it's not. We love our kids regardless. We support them regardless. One way that would help is also to share your own struggles with them. For example, when I was in school, I was a good student, but I used to struggle with math, for example. And sometimes I share that with my patients, that when I was in school, math was really hard for me for some reason, and I wasn't the best at it, even though I was good at other subjects. I had a very hard time with math. Is there anything you're struggling with? So, you know, I would share with my children, inshallah, that, you know, this was hard for me. Are you struggling with anything? Is anything hard for you? So that kind of normalizes that it's okay to not be perfect. And it kind of normalizes that if they're going through anything, they would come and tell you too. They wouldn't feel like a failure. They wouldn't feel like they have to present themselves as perfect. So I think that's really important. as well. The other thing is, of course, if they have productive hobbies, make sure you are supporting that a lot. And that can be hard sometimes because we have so many responsibilities, but make sure to prioritize that you're supporting the productive things that they are good at and interested in, because that would also help in them not using their phones so much, because of course we all know that social media is associated with negative mental health. And now with AI chatbots being available and readily available on their phones, a lot of kids are actually resorting to that for counseling, which is potentially very dangerous because there's no professional coach or doctor or a religious scholar who's monitoring those advice that the phone is giving, right? So it will just validate whatever you're telling it. So make sure that you are the person who they can come to for support, for non-judgmental communication, so they don't resort to sources that could be harmful, like those chat AI bots are talking to strangers on the internet, or friends who might not be giving them the best advice. So that's important as well. It's also really important to remember, if God forbid your kid does get diagnosed with a mental health condition, you're not alone. There are so many resources available. Your doctor should be the person you should reach out to ask your questions as well. Because I feel that one of the greatest things you can do to protect your kid's mental health is to take care of your own mental health. That's one of the best things you can do. So make sure you are taking care of your own mental well-being as well. When kids are in a young age, it does affect the child as well. They pick up on the anxiety. So the way you are managing stressors is the way the kid will learn to manage stressors in life. So tell them, how when you went through a low time, how you grew as a person, what you learned from it. So that way they learn that hardships are not there because we didn't do something right or we aren't good enough. It's because it's a part of life. There are tests and there are ways to overcome those things, and it does get better. In terms of treatment, I know that a lot of parents are very, skeptical about medication for anxiety and depression, and that's completely understandable. So many questions come in parents' minds from, is my kid going to be on this medication forever? Is it going to change his personality? Because I like how my child is. I don't want them to change as a person, It's so important to ask all those questions at the visit. Your doctor should be the one answering all those questions, and make sure you take an informed decision. And if for any reason, even with all the information, you're not ready to start medication, that's all right. But make sure the kid is getting the other sources of help and therapy, right? Getting support from our community, right? Make sure that all those other avenues are still being explored, even if you're not ready for medication. And lastly, you should know that you're not alone. If, God forbid, your kid ends up going through this struggle, there's help available. You don't have to do it alone. We don't have to be perfect as parents. Kids need parents who are compassionate and who make them realize that they're not alone. They're not alone in their families, they're not alone in their faith, and they're definitely never going to be alone in their struggles. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
I have a question. So, though we are in 2025, right, mental health is a pretty common topic. But still there is a taboo and stigma associated with that. So if a child is diagnosed with depression, how does that impact their school records and their future lives? So you mentioned about parents are concerned about medication, but how about that social stigma associated with that?
That is such an excellent question, because I've actually been asked that several times too. I remember when I was in Pakistan, I was doing a clinic at this school, and one of the teens, she was a girl, she got diagnosed with depression, and I explained everything to the mom, and the first thing she asked was, she needs to get married, who's gonna marry her if in our neighborhood? And this was like a squatter settlement in Karachi, so like people knew each other. And she was like, are you gonna tell other people? Like, will they find out like who's gonna marry my daughter if she's depressed? Like, that was her first concern. So this is a very valid concern. And it's pretty ridiculous that some employers do mental health checks too now, So the important thing is to know that any health condition that you have is confidential. The care is confidential. There, you have rights as patients, which you should very well be aware of. Even if your doctor is Muslim or the therapist is Muslim and you think they're in the community or if they're in the neighborhood, patient privacy is a right, okay? So nobody needs to know the diagnosis until your child decides to share it with their best friend. You can have that conversation with them, right? That it's their right. So first of all, it's none of anybody's business. Simply put, nobody needs to know. It's a very personal matter. And that stigma and taboo, obviously, in an ideal world, should not be there, but the reality is that it is. It should definitely not become an obstacle in the way of the child getting the help that he or she needs. Okay? So be aware of your rights, be aware of your rights as patients. Talk to your kid about who they want to share with who they don't want to share it with. And I always tell my patients, when they feel uncomfortable after getting the diagnosis, about numbers, how common it is that 40% of teens have it, right? So that makes them feel not so alone. And I always tell them that some of your kids might be patients in this office and you don't know, because it's invisible. So it really depends on who you want to share it with, if you feel comfortable. But I do feel like that as a community, we should be supportive of each other. And as a community, we should not be judgmental, because just like other health problems, it can really happen to anybody. That was a great question, by the way.
How to slow down teens from using their social media time and screen time?
That's another great question. So the first step is obviously to model that, like not to be on our own phones all the time, and that's a struggle too, because we all use our phones a lot. Sometimes we say that, oh, I'm using it for work, but it's still screen time, right? So that's the first thing. So it starts at a very young age. The American Academy of Peds recommends like 2 hours a day. No child is getting 2 hours a day. The reality is all kids are getting more than that. So try to minimize it as much as you can at a young age. And then one thing I talked about was getting them interested in things that they enjoy doing, right?
Social media is what they enjoy.
Yeah.
That's what they enjoy doing.
But there has to be other interests that they have, right? And then you can set some rules, like that on the dinner table you can't bring their phones. I can't bring my phone and you can't bring your phone either. So at least set some rules around that. I think that's fine. Your kid is probably going to give you an attitude about it, but that's okay. Teens have an attitude, that's the reality, sadly. But set some boundaries that, on dinner table, phones aren't allowed, right? We all should have that rule in our homes, actually, whether we have kids or not, right? Because mealtime has changed now as well. If I think about how it was like when I was a kid and I was growing up without phone, it was such a fun time, and now it's just like sometimes even if you go for iftar somewhere, everybody's just like, I'm like, how about we talk, And we all feel like we should be talking, but we're all on our phones. So modeling that right behavior is one thing, supporting their activities that they enjoy is another thing, setting some rules is really the third one. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just add to that. Like I said, control what you can control. They don't pay the bill, you do. So I would suggest the fight is going to last about 3 weeks. Because I recently took my son's phone, and for about 3 weeks he was huffing and puffing, but you can just see gradually he would change, and he was over it. He'll occasionally say, "Can I get my phone back?" And then I'd be like, "No." And so I think they get over it over time, but you just have to know it's going to be a fight and be okay with it. I was okay with it. And then, of course, his mom gave him back his phone, but alhamdulillah.
Yes, but there's also a way to put some restrictions through family links, etc. So, like,
It doesn't work after the kid's age turns 13 or 14.
No, it does.
Yeah, it doesn't
My
happen.
daughter is 13 plus. I have a family link set up where you can put a restriction that she cannot use phone between this and this, only calling and messaging, and no internet, nothing. And maybe I can.
Yeah, so there are things you can do. I think you can still get like their texts and their pictures that they send out and stuff. So there's a lot of apps that you can go out and do. Last year we did it. I think we need to bring it back this year, where we had a parent come in who was familiar with all the apps, and they would, as long as you brought your computers in and your phones in, they just downloaded and showed you how to do it, and you were able to get it. Now our kids are very crafty and creative. They do find ways around it, but the more we can control, right, I think the more, the less they'll have.
We,
So
shut, we shut off their Wi-Fi. They use LTE.
yeah, exactly.
Doesn't work anymore.
So at our school, we take the phones, and if they continue to have it and I catch it with it, we take it for a week or two, a month, and then sometimes a whole year.
Wow.
Good.
I had two things. One is a comment about your question about social stigma. So one thing is at schools, they are allowed to ask you if your child is taking any medication actively, like at the beginning of the year, because they need to know, especially if they're taking it during the school day, right? Or if you require any accommodations or anything for your student for whatever mental health reasons. So I would say like those things that you have to disclose for the purposes of the school administration, they're not allowed to share it with anyone else. And even for you, when you're sharing it with teachers, teachers know very little. All they know is this is the title of whatever the diagnosis is, and this is at this time of day they have to go take whatever medication or something like that, right? That's the minimum that they know. Anything beyond that, like if you need help for any reason from those teachers, even that they won't know. So like you would have to go say, hey, this is what my child needs, this is what their diagnosis is. I need you to give them extra time. I need you to help make sure that they get put in a group of people who are not bullying them or whatever it is, right? Like that really has to come from you. They will not disclose it, even from the administration to the teacher. So I work a lot with education and student legal, right? So I just wanted to make sure that you were aware of that. It's not so much it's social stigma, but it's still something that affects our kids and how you interact with the school. The other question that I had was my concern that I get a lot from students is, especially young Muslim boys, is around the ideas of interacting with young women and at school, and like the ideas of what is a healthy relationship, how to manage these issues of consent, and like my son was telling me that he's seen kids, young boys get blamed for different activities when they're just in a room alone with another girl. Right now, I know Islamically we say, okay, just don't be in a room, and like that's what I told him. I'm like, even if it's 3 boys and 1 girl in the room, don't be there. Like get yourself out of that situation. But I just wondered, how do you talk to them about it? How do you manage these discussions? Because that one was really hard for me to know how to navigate as for my team.
I didn't understand the question clearly. So is the question about how to teach them about consent and how to kind of interact with girls in school? Like if they have to work with them on a project or something, is that the question?
I mean, I don't think it's so much the project, it's what happens outside of this, observed classroom environment, right? There's a lot of social environments, these kids are on chats together and all kinds of things, and they see and they witness, and they sometimes get pulled into, despite their best efforts, participating in certain discussions and social situations. So how do you teach them how to navigate that? How do you teach them when you're at an Islamic school about like what does consent mean in this society? How do we navigate it as Muslims? I just wanted to get your
So from a clinical standpoint, of course, it starts at a young age. The first thing is this, I feel like all of this comes down to building a value system in our kids, right? Like how to interact with females, how to interact in a group, how to be on their best conduct. So it all comes down to the value system that we're kind of inculcating in them. I think the first approach should be to open-endedly ask them how they feel, what is their opinion about it. That would be a good way to start the conversation so that you know what you're dealing with. So that should be the first approach. And then, yeah, like from the standpoint of like school, you want to make sure that they are not falling behind because of their reservations as well. So I think it's fine to tell them that if the interactions are required for work or anything, it's okay because we all work together in a setting, even in a masjid, we all work together. So I think that's important as well. Other than that, yeah, it starts at a young age. You shouldn't wait till they become 10, 11, 12, and then they're about to start their puberty to talk about these things. These are things that you should start talking about way earlier. So that way it's not going to become uncomfortable for them once they're going through that age as well. Yeah.
I think at our school, I think at our school, what we try to do is let the girls and boys know they have a responsibility. And so the responsibility of the young ladies is to protect their reputation. And so if you try to avoid those situations as much as possible. And then when it comes to the males, I tell them that your job is to protect the reputation of our young ladies. And so, it's unfortunate, but society is more forgiving for males who talk to multiple women than they are for women to talk to multiple men. And so I tell our young men, it's your responsibility to protect our women's reputation. And so in that situation, you're right, your son should come out of the room, but I would expect the young lady as well to come out the room because she can see like, oh, okay, this is not a space in which I should be in. So it is a difficult situation. Alhamdulillah, we have brother Sadiq Abdullah, who is our theology teacher. He does an excellent job of like answering these questions and trying to support our students. So I wish he was here. We were trying to get him here, but inshallah we'll have him back. But like I said, yeah, just guard your reputation. That's where it starts for me. So yeah, and I know it's difficult.
So I think there are twofold questions, but more like first one is, since you're in the already a profession, right, medical profession, so are there resources within Muslim community for accessing mental health management as well as the stress management for parents too and kids too? For both, like, are
That's a
there-
great question. So I moved to the area fairly recently, so I'm still learning about resources myself. But we have Dr. Rania Awad, who's a great resource. We are so blessed to have her in our community. There's actually a Muslim psychology lab at Stanford. We have Maristan as well. And also, if you want a counselor who's more faith-based, you can reach out to them as well to connect you with that. That way, your kid's not gonna get confused when they're dealing with depression or anxiety, getting different ideas from somebody who's not very culturally competent or aware of our unique challenges as Muslims when we're going through mental health issues. Yeah. Yes.
So in line with the earlier question that she asked, so you said like etiquettes are taught not from puberty and all and early on, right?
Yeah.
We assume that there is like a separate female section and a male section, but the kids that go to school in public schools are Gen Ed, right? And do we have any Islamic resources for Islamic etiquettes for students who are not attending Islamic school so they can learn early on?
That's actually a very good question. Like I said, I'm new to the area, so I'm not familiar if any such etiquette classes exist within this community or within the Muslim centers that we do have here. But I think collectively that is something that we should have. We should be talking to children, we should be having sessions where we do talk about all of this, the etiquettes and how to be modest, and at the same time making sure that interactions are appropriate between boys and girls. So I think those are important things that we can do in our community actually, and we should be doing in an ideal situation.
Yeah. I think this conversation is the beginning. I think Sister Druxner mentioned like having this every year before students go into going into ninth grade and having this class. So I think this is something that you, as people in the community, you need to fight for this. You need to establish this. You need to come up with a process if your students aren't going to go to Islamic schools or homeschool, and figure out a way. Like I said before, the resources and the way that it needs to happen is in this room today. So it's up to you, inshallah.
So in continuation to my question, and like for example, you run your high school, right? And it's a co-ed. I know the girls are there, and like how do you manage